What's up, y'all? Welcome in Week 9 Daily Destroyer DFS show, talking DraftKings main slate, part of the Dynasty Warzone Network. As always, I am your co-host, Tyler at FF Tyler O, joined by my co-host, as always, Lou at Lou Dog Sherman. Got the handle change in there. Love to see it, Lou. Before we jump into the 9 slate, quick recap of last week. Things went great for me. I had a couple down weeks, 2 down weeks to be specific, going into week 8, but absolutely crushed my week 8 team. The Ridley news got me to Gage, which, of course, if you're paying attention, Gage got a 0. But what that did is that allowed me to get up to Cup, and then I went down to Dan Arnold. Played Godwin, played Cup, played Michael Carter, played Henderson. Both Carter and Henderson were 2 dudes that we were strongly on. AJ Brown. Things were good. So it was a good week for me. Good to bounce back. Good to make that cash. Lou, thoughts on your week 8 squad team? Where to go wrong?
Yeah, so I like overcorrected in a way. So the Ridley news actually put me on to Patterson, which wasn't that bad of a play.
It wasn't
he
a killer.
Did all right. And I felt pretty good about that. Like, he still got 18 points, and it feels so gross to play someone like Russell Gage, but I mean, obviously, like what you're saying, like that allowed you to get other pieces. I switched to the Swift news, like many people did, and went on Swift, and that just ended up changing sort of the rest of my team and got me off of AJ Brown. And I was deciding, I had a couple different lineups I was trying to do. One of them was Cup and Van Jefferson, and the other one, which I went with, was going to Henderson and Godwin instead, and then having more of these mid-range guys. So I had Pittman and Higgins on my team, but then I didn't go all the way down to Arnold because I had some salary. So honestly, if I just went with AJ Brown, but I wanted some exposure to the Rams, so maybe in a sense I just overthought things and tried to get too cute. And then going into the late slate, I was trailing, so I switched off of Godwin in order to try to catch up in those cases that I was already behind and everyone had Godwin. So wasn't the best slate for me overall. And it just goes to show that sometimes you don't want to overreact to late news, because sometimes it can hurt you just thinking too much about just changing up what you've been thinking all week.
Yep, that'll do it. Let's jump right in. Quarterbacks. It's interesting this week, kind of big picture week 9 slate, as the Rams are not on the slate. Those have been some of our favorite plays all week, obviously. I mean, all year with Cup and Henderson. Unfortunately, Derrick Henry is down. That's always one of the plays that we're back and forth on as a chalk play in our cash lineups. And usually DA is up there as well, but with Jordan Love at quarterback, it does complicate things. So there's a lot of ways to go. There's not a lot of straightforward thought processes in this week 9. There's a lot of different options that you have, so it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. Might not be the strongest week in terms of cash lineups, but hey, that's why we're here. We're here to talk through these players and provide you with those strong plays. So let's kick it off here with the quarterbacks. I'm actually going to start with some of the cheaper ones, because I think this is where a lot of people will be leaning, as there are some cheap options at quarterback this week who I think could be some pretty strong plays considering where you go, in other spots with your lineup. The 2 that really stick out to me are going to be Tyrod Taylor at 5,000 against Miami Dolphins. Great matchup. And then Jordan Love at 4,400 against the Chiefs. Another great matchup. I mean, we got a 5K and a 44K quarterback situation here, both in great matchups, both already called the starters. Definitely frees up a lot of cash to go elsewhere. Your thoughts on Tyrod Taylor and Jordan Love in your lineups this week, Lou?
Yeah, I think this is one of those weeks where we're going to say, like, flip over the cards and look at our opponents, and I'll almost not be surprised no matter who they used at quarterback, because there's just different price ranges. And I think each of those ranges allows you to do different things. So it almost is one of those weeks where I think it's just going to change your overall lineup construction. So I'm not going to play as much cash than normal, because, like, say you're going to play Lamar Jackson, but then Jordan Love or Tyrod Taylor get 20 points, then you're likely going to get crushed unless Lamar gets 35 points or whatever. So it's going to be really tough playing cash this week because of all the different quarterback options you really have, and it can go so many different ways. I don't love playing on weeks like this in cash because you're going to get mad when someone like Jordan Love gets there, and then you just spent 3,000 more on a quarterback, and they're able to do so much else with the rest of their lineup.
Yep. So with that said, though, Tyrod Taylor, Jordan Love, prefer one to the other? Are you going to be playing one? Thoughts strongly one way?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm leaning Tyrod. I'm just generally a fan of paying down when the ability to do so is there. And for 5K, instead of going all the way up to a Lamar, like Lamar is in a great spot. Don't get me wrong. Like Jalen Hurts is in a great spot, but to save 2,000 plus at one position allows me to do a lot more in other positions. And I think when it comes down to it, like we've seen it from Taylor in the past. Like he's played 2 games this season and he has at least 15 points in both of those. And for him to hurt you, he would really have to get like under 10. But I think the likelihood, because we've seen him run the ball a lot more in the past than he has more recently, but he's got the in-game experience that Jordan Love doesn't really have. And I think it's pretty safe now that he's opened up. I think if it was just Jordan Love against someone like Lamar or Jalen Hurts, I'd have like a different opinion. But you could also go to like Tua, who's only 5,800. And there's just so many other options that I'm going to have a hard time getting all the way up to Lamar, at least for something like cash this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also looking at Lamar if I can fit him. I haven't really built the lineups out yet. Lamar at 7,300 is still a great price considering the ceiling that we know that he has. He has been passing a lot more than he has been running, but regardless, we know what he is capable of. Don't really need to speak too much on Lamar. We know what he does and why he's a good play. The other one is going to be Jalen Hurts. Like for the first time all year, he burned folks last week. I think it was just under 12 points. On DraftKings wasn't great, but 6,700 this week against the Chargers. The Chargers have been one of the better pass defenses in the NFL this year, absolutely stout against the pass, but they have been letting it happen on the ground. Like they are a bit of a run funnel. I mean, you can just run all over these Chargers. You can't really pass on them. Doesn't lend itself well to normal quarterbacks, but with Jalen Hurts, and we know how much he can run, 80 yards on the ground and rushing a touchdown in is in play, especially against this Chargers defense. So at 6,700, even though I played Hurts last week and he burned me, I'm perfectly okay with going back to Jalen Hurts at 6,700 this week if he can be fit. Thoughts? You already talked about your thoughts on Lamar, but thoughts on Hurts?
Yeah, Hurts I think is super interesting because he's the type of guy who in certain weeks this would be just a screaming value, 6,700 for Hurts in a matchup that I'm likely trying to target in ways. I think it's one of those games that we could easily see being high paced and high scoring, and it might be getting talked up a little less now than I was expecting going into the week. And Hurts coming off, I mean, I played him last week in cash and he only had 14 pass attempts. It was a very weird game. And
but he had like 70 yards rushing though still,
Yeah, that was all. If he didn't have 70 yards rushing, he would have had like 5 fantasy points.
Exactly.
And it was just crazy in a game that they score 44 points. He has 0 touchdowns.
And so that's what I'm saying, though. I don't think that's going to happen again.
Oh no, but my point being, people are coming off of this like bad taste in their mouth from Hurts, and this is just the type of spot that it's going to be bounced back from just a sentiment standpoint, where people just remember last week, oh, he only has 11 points. Like they think of that, oh, that's his downside. But I mean, facing the Chargers, facing a more realistic team, so to speak, where they're going to have to fight for yards and points and keep up, then I think it's more likely that we get back to Hurts' 20-point floor.
Yep, I caught that Lions dig there, Lou. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Any other quarterbacks you think are worth mentioning before we go to the quarterback pool of 3 for this week?
Very high on the Lions last week. I'd say Tua.
Never behind the Lions.
Slightly mentioned. Really like Tua this week. 5,800. This is a game. I mean, how many games are you going to get to face a team like the Texans on a given season? And the last 3, he only had 39 attempts last week, but they've been passing the ball so much. And Devontae Parker looks doubtful. He's probably not going to play in this game, but there's still plenty of options for Tua in this offense. He has somewhat of a floor. We haven't really seen the upside of him running much. Like, he's not running as often around the goal line as maybe we were hoping or expecting from Tua. But that's almost good in a way where he has this passing floor, and they like to pass for touchdowns. He had a really tough matchup last week against the Bills and was still able to get 16 fantasy points. So I feel like Tua is pretty safe to get you at least like 18 to 20 fantasy points in this matchup. It's at home against the Texans. Texans are just such a mess, especially on defense.
Makes sense. All right, pool of 3 quarterbacks.
Let's say Tyrod, Tua, and Lamar.
Going over to the running back position, things get a little more muddy, as we mentioned. Henderson, who's been our dude pretty much the whole season, not on the slate. No Derrick Henry, and no Derrick Henry for the rest of the season. Unfortunate. So open things up. We have some questions, and there are definitely some guys that there's no smash running back plays in my opinion. Like, there's not a single guy in here that is like an auto click like Henderson has been, or Derrick Henry in certain weeks. So it does kind of make things a little bit more difficult in my opinion. But let's start at the top. There's 2 guys that I think are interesting that are up at the top. It's going to be Alvin Kamara at 82 and Austin Eckler at 79. We know what they're capable of. We know they get work in the pass game. We love those pass catches on DraftKings. Thoughts on Kamara and Eckler?
I think Kamara is as close to block as any of the running backs we have this week. He's just in the best matchup, and there aren't really better plays in his price range. Obviously, like, if CMC were to play, like, you could argue that he just has that crazy floor ceiling combo, but we don't really know how healthy he is yet. Eckler has been just such a stud this year, and I feel like it's not getting talked about as much as if it was a Kamara or a CMC with his numbers. But ever since the first week, he didn't have any targets, oddly enough, in that first week we talked about.
It was a panic moment for folks. Absolutely.
He has at least 5 targets in every other game. And it seems like his floor right now is something along the lines of like 10 to 15 carries, 5 receptions, and he's getting a lot of work around the red zone. And the
Eagles run defense has not been good this year.
One of the best, one of the run funnels that we like to target each week. So I think the likelihood of Eckler getting at least 50 yards on the ground and through the air is pretty high in this week. And for him to get 20 fantasy points doesn't really take much, especially if he can get into the end zone. And it's already a game that, as I was mentioning with Hurts, like, I'd like to target in GPPs because I think it's one of those that I could easily see it going off. And the Chargers just end up playing in a lot of these games that, and the Eagles, where these games that one of the teams is scoring 30 plus points and either the other one is playing catch up and sticking with them, which is obviously what we'd love. Another one of those like Browns Chargers game would be great. And Eckler had 34 fantasy points in that game. So I like Eckler. He's my top running back, I think, this week.
I'm with you on that. Another one that I would not one of the top priced ones, but another one that I'm really interested in is going to be Zeke at 7K. The matchup doesn't bother me. I know the Broncos looked like they were quite the strong defense as the season was starting, but that was mostly due to playing bad offensive teams. They're not scaring me anymore. And Zeke, it's more so the volume play here. Zeke has been a lock for 20 touches pretty much majority of the season. There has been some scares with how much they've been using Pollard. I mean, it's probably good. Pollard's a good running back, and they probably should be benching Zeke a little bit to give him a little bit of rest. But coming out of the bye, actually, Pollard had the least amount of touches he's had since week 1. His snaps were down the lowest they've been since week 1. I'm not saying they're phased Pollard out, but I mean, I believe Zeke is back, and there was concern in the early season about Zeke. So Zeke is back, and for Zeke to be 7K, and for Zeke to be, what is this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, have 6 running backs ahead of him, knowing that he is pretty much old Zeke, locking that volume up at 7K sounds good to me.
Yeah, it's the type of thing where Zeke is probably underpriced at 7K. Like
He is
he shouldn't
underpriced in
be
my
less
opinion.
than Joe Mixon. Like Joe Mixon has been putting up a lot of decent fantasy days, but when it comes down to it, like it's been 5 straight games of at least 20 touches for Zeke. Like he's been the guy, and we know with Zeke, he's got 2 straight games without a touchdown. But we also know the upside of his is multiple touchdowns in games. And facing Denver, they're at home, which I think is good for Dallas in this game. If they were in Denver, maybe it'd be a little different. But Zeke is another one of the best options, and this is where I come back to playing someone like Tyrod or Jordan Love. Is you would be able to play Zeke and Eckler if you go down at quarterback.
Yeah, that's a huge piece of this. Is we like a lot of these running backs at the top. Can't afford them all. Gonna have to pay down at QB. Let's shift down the list just a little bit. There's 2 that are sticking out to me. That's going to be Devante Booker at 59 and Myles Gaskin at 58. Booker, as we know, it doesn't look like Saquon's playing. He tested positive for COVID. Seems as though maybe it was a false positive, but the ankle's still nagging. I haven't seen any news out there saying that he's 100% out, but it is leaning that way, and I would not expect to see Saquon out there this week. So Booker at 5,900, who is pretty much taken over this Saquon role. There's no committee behind Saquon when Saquon's out. It is Booker's game. He's clearly not as good enough running back, but he just continues to get it done. In the touch department. I mean, he's locked into 18 to 20 touches. It seems, or maybe 16 to 20 touches when there is no Saquon. Absolutely love to see that. And then Gaskin at 5,800. About the same price. Things were bad to start the year for Gaskin. It was ups and downs. People were pretty frustrated with him, but with Malcolm Brown hitting IR, things have looked good the last couple of weeks. He's had 4 targets the last 2 weeks in each game, and he had 15 attempts and 12 attempts. So the touches are there. They seem to be going to him, and I think what really brings me to Gaskin is going to be the matchup against the Texans, which we know is just an awful defense. Bottom 3 run defense. Terrible pass defense. It is absolutely opens itself up to be a good Gaskin game. So thoughts, Booker, thoughts, Gaskin, Lou.
Yeah, the way I see it is Booker is more of the cash play and Gaskin is more of the GPP play. Because whenever we talk about playing Myles Gaskin, you're really trying to capture games where he gets 5+ receptions, and that's, I mean, he's done it a couple times this year in targets. We saw it against that Tampa Bay game where he had 10 catches. And I'm not saying that he's going to get that, but I think a lot of people are going to go towards the Tua double stacks with like Waddle and Gesicki, since that target tree is going to be a lot more condensed. But even without Parker, like Gaskin could see more targets because of that. And this is just one of those games that you could see it getting out of hand because it's just 2 like lower level teams that don't really love to play defense. But Houston has kind of been a matchup that brings out a lot of fantasy points for both sides of the games. But with Booker, it's hard to really see Booker fail. Like you said, just the way they've been using him, it's hard to see him get less than 10 points. And is he going to get more than 20? Like he's only gotten more than 20 once, and it's 20.8. So his like range of outcomes is somewhere between like 14 to 18 points,
which is great for cash.
Makes it a great
cash play. Yeah.
But I mean, I'd like to see him get used more in the passing game than he has been. Last week was nice to see that with 5 catches, 60 yards. But until it's still the Giants, and until we see the Giants really putting up more points, it's a little scary to go there for something like cash. But there's not that many great screaming values in the 6K or under range. So that's where I think Booker is decently safe if you're trying to look and save money off of someone like Zeke or Eckler.
2 other plays, similar range. Wanted to get your thoughts. I believe Elijah Mitchell, it looks like he's trending towards playing, is going to be popular just because of what we've seen him do the last couple of weeks. But for me, it's the lack of pass floor, which kind of scares me off of him. I'm particularly fading Elijah Mitchell, even though he has been running incredibly well. But if for some reason the cards are up, I just, do we see Hasty in there? Like, I don't know. It just scares me a little bit to play him in cash. And then Zack Moss is going to be the other one at 53, a bit cheaper than the ones we've mentioned. He is clearly the lead back there now. The concern of the Bills, though, is that regardless of the situation, no matter how many points they're up, they continue to pass the ball. It's nice to see him get work. I mean, the last 3 games, Moss has gotten 7 targets, 4 targets, 4 targets, but those rush attempts are hovering around that 8 to 10 range. So not something you absolutely love to see. But at 5,300, it does seem like a okay play if you need to save that cash. Thoughts on Mitchell? Thoughts on Moss?
Yeah, I think Moss is he's one of those guys that you're comfortable playing in season-long stuff, but on DraftKings, like, he really needs to get the touchdowns to get there for you. He hasn't really been super efficient running the ball, and his pass game work is too sporadic. And obviously, if Singletary's healthy and out there, he'll get his own touches as well. So that's the issue I have with Moss is, yeah, he's cheap, but it seems pretty limited just the way that the Bills play.
Cool.
What about like Boston Scott at 5,200? He seems to have more of a role. The problem is, obviously, his upside's somewhat limited with Jordan Howard there.
So,
and,
yeah. So my thoughts on the Eagles backfield. So I actually, going to toot my own horn here. I think I nailed it last week when I was talking about going into this game when people are all hyped on Gainwell. I was like, listen, we don't ever, when a lead back goes down, we don't really know how it's going to break out, right? We think we know and we want to know, but I think like one of the best case scenarios, or at least like, it was a little bit unique situation, is Montgomery goes down. Everyone thought it was going to be Damian, but then Herbert emerged. And I thought it was like similar when what I was mentioning last week was, hey, all right, Miles is down. We've seen a lot of Gainwell. He's looked good. People are going to go to Gainwell. But like, what if Gainwell keeps the same role and Boston Scott takes over the Miles Sanders role? And that's exactly what happened. So, but my thought of that is like, if Miles Sanders was in that game and they were winning by 30, 40 points the whole time, Miles Sanders probably would have ate. And I would expect the same thing on a Gainwell. My concern is if the Eagles see themselves in not a close matchup, do we see more Gainwell? And does the Boston Scott get dialed back a bit? I mean, I think last week was a bit of an anomaly game, as we've kind of alluded to with the Eagles, where they were just crushing. So Hurts didn't need to run. They were just handing the ball off to their running backs, and it was getting the job done, and they just continued to ride that game plan, and it worked. It was against the Lions, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to work against the Chargers. Yes, they can run against the Chargers pretty well, but I just, between Jordan Howard getting a bunch of touches last week and it's a sticky, it's a muddy situation, I believe, with like a 3-headed running back situation with the Eagles. Plus, you have Hurts to worry about as well. So, I wouldn't mind taking a shot if you wanted to in some of the larger tournaments, but for cash, I'm avoiding these Eagles running backs.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go there in cash, but I think if there's a running back to go for, in my mind, it's Scott, because he does, in the past, he's gotten a lot more work in the past game. And I want to say part of the reason why Howard got the usage he got last week was because they were just so far ahead, and it was easy enough. Like, there's not really much downside risk if you throw Howard out there and he were to get hurt. I think they wanted to limit the Scott and Gainwell usage to an extent, but yeah, I mean, I probably won't really go there, but I thought it was interesting because that's part of the game that I'm trying to attack, and it's a way to get off of. I don't think Zack Moss is going to necessarily be chalky, but I've heard some talk around him as being one of the guys for cheap. ETR has him around 13% ownership, so that's a decent clip for someone. So I figured I'd look around there and see what other options there are.
Any other running backs you want to talk about before I ask you for your pool of 5 running backs, Lou?
I mean, it's really gross, but if you want, like, the Texans running backs are cheap, and that could be something in that game.
Texans.
I know, but like if you're really like looking for points just from some sort of cheap way, I mean, Burkhead's there now. He had 4 targets last week. In a weird way, like
It was
Burkhead
garbage
might be
time
the
though,
guy.
man. No, I don't think so, man. So
No,
my thought here is David Johnson came out as a starter. This game
and he
got
had 2
out of
carries.
hand real quick, and then it was just trash time. So I think that's why we saw a lot more wrecks. Like I think like I just mentioned about like how the Eagles backfield is messy. I think that
Yeah,
Houston's is even messier, man. So I just like I think also looking at last week is tough because like the Eagles were in a very outlier situation, being up that much, and the Houston Texans were, I wouldn't say much of an outlier because they've been terrible all year, but they were down like 30 or 40 points for part of that game. So I just think that they were just like running. I don't know. They're both muddy situations. I don't trust it, so I will not be looking to Eagles or Texans running backs at all. It's I can't put my finger on it. I can't come up with a strong take on who I think the running back is. So because of that, it's not where I'm going.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty gross to get there for sure.
All right, pool of 5 running backs, Lou.
You go Eckler, Zeke, Gaskin, Booker, and then I'm gonna say I kind of like Aaron Jones in GPPs this week. I just think that's the type of game against the Chiefs that we could see him having a better game. He did have 11 targets last week. Obviously, we don't know if Jordan Love is going to favor him much, but we could see Jordan Love just dumping off a bunch of times to Aaron Jones, and they could lean on him a little more running the ball. And so I could see this being an Aaron Jones week. So he'd be like in my pool for GPPs, especially
Shifting
with
over,
the ownership on the other expensive guys.
yeah, it's tough. Shifting over to wide receivers. Again, it gets a little difficult. There's no Cup this week, which has been the cash money play pretty much all year long. Devonta Adams is nice, but with Jordan Love, there is some uncertainties. That brings me to the top here at Tyreek Hill at 79. Things have not been good to the Chiefs, but even when the Chiefs are not looking good, I mean, shoot, we saw 18 targets last week. He had 9 in week 7, going down from the week subsequent, like 12, 13. 12. It is just a good situation for Tyreek because no matter how bad the Chiefs are playing, they are still targeting Tyreek Hill early and often. So at 7,900, we also like the floor is there, and we also are very like we know this dude breaks slates. 50 point. I mean, yes, the Chiefs have been bad, but it's still the same team. So I mean, he's capable of putting up 50 DK points. So Tyreek Hill at 7,900. I guess if there's like one player that I would be locking into my lineups as one of the first plays, it would be Tyreek Hill. Thoughts on Tyreek?
Yeah, I think Tyreek is a pretty solid play this week. It's not going to be any sort of like quiet of a play because of what he did last week. And it just seems like Travis Kelce has been a little off the last couple of weeks, and they've been leaning a little more heavily on Tyreek. But yeah, I really like Tyreek. If you're going to be paying up for wide receiver, he seems like the pretty solid play. Stephon Diggs is like all right too, but if someone's going to come out of this week and just completely smash, I think it's a lot higher likelihood that it's going to be Tyreek.
So one of the places that I'll probably be looking to save some cash this week outside of the quarterback position, because I believe I'll probably be playing some of the more expensive running backs, is going to be wide receiver. So I did want to kind of turn our attention down a little bit here to talk about maybe some of these cheaper wide receivers and ones that you're interested in. Just to name a couple off the top of my head that I like this week, Amari Cooper after a huge game is only 5,700. Devontae Parker is out. Waddle at 5,600, especially considering the volume that Waddle gets. And then T. Higgins at 53. Again, just pure volume play. As he's been a guy that's been, his floor is 6-7 targets, but like we've also seen him get 10 to 15 targets as well. So, this is a range that I believe I'll be targeting a lot. This 5 to 6K range at wide receiver because I need to save some cash somewhere outside of quarterback. So, your thoughts on these 5,000 to 6,000 range wide receivers? Who do you like? Who you playing?
I think my favorite is going to be Cooper, especially if Lamb is truly injured.
I think he's truly injured. I mean, he might play, but he has an ankle sprain, man. It's something.
I think. Well, I guess what I mean by that is Lamb seems more injured than Cooper does. Cooper gets limited in practice once a week anyway, and he just ends up playing. And he's coming off of 8 catches, 120 yards, and a touchdown. It's not like
And
he's
he's
been
5,700. I mean, I
yeah.
don't get it either, man.
And we've seen his upside, and Amari Cooper's upside is just way higher than Waddle's. Waddle, we've seen him hit 20 points once,
He's
and
like they're
he
like
hasn't
being
even hit
priced.
100
They're like
yards.
being priced like the Broncos have this incredible pass defense too. You know, like it doesn't make a lot of sense to me why Amari Cooper's priced at 57 this week. It just seems like an egregious underprice.
Yeah, I think part of it is like timing, and when their game was. But he was only 5,100 last week, so I think part of it was like they came out of the bye. He got lowered a week ago, and now they're like starting to get him back up. But he really should be like, I don't know, 6,500 at least or something. And yeah, like you said, like maybe it's a matchup thing, but it's gonna be really hard for me to get off of Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a question in chat on Beasley.
Yep, we have Boss Man Fat asks Beasley versus Jags or Amari.
In a weird way, I think I prefer Beasley over Waddle because I think Waddle is going to get somewhat over-owned, especially with Parker out. So I really like Beasley because he's facing the Jaguars, who just like give up so many points to opposing wide receivers. And Beasley's had back-to-back very good weeks, and he's only 5,400. He's another guy who just seems like he has a very defined role in the offense, and he doesn't really need a touchdowns to get there. He almost has the same role as Waddle, but as we were mentioning with Josh Allen, they love to throw the ball, and I think even in a game script that they are expected to be leading a lot of this game, I still think I would prefer Beasley for that ownership leverage.
Yep, and I think like we're talking Beasley or Amari, leaning Amari. I think I would lean Amari too.
I lean Amari.
But I think the answer could also be both here. You know, like I think you could easily just play both here, and I don't think there's any problem with that thought process whatsoever.
So the thing with Amari, why I'll almost always side with him over Beasley, is his upside is way higher because he's the type of guy who can come out of this game with 30, 40 fantasy points. And you don't really see Beasley hitting that ever because Cooper is more likely to get multiple touchdowns and the 100-yard bonus in games. And we've seen it in the past with the Cowboys where Amari, he's had multiple games this year with at least 10 targets. He had 13 last week. He had 17 week 1. So the likelihood of him getting a spike up in targets, especially if Lamb is truly injured and Gallup is already out, then I just think Cooper has much higher of a ceiling.
Agreed. T. Higgins, though, another guy to talk about here. For some reason, I think you said this. For some reason, DraftKings will not raise his price. Like, and you know, it's just been pretty solid. Like, the floor is nice. I guess that's what I want to say about him is like, but he hasn't had a touchdown since week 2. So something to think about. I mean, obviously Chase is out there scoring these tutties, but I mean, he hasn't had a touchdown since week 2, but like he's been getting a ton of volume, and without those touchdowns, like his floor has been around that 13-point range, which you absolutely love to see. So thoughts on Higgins?
Yeah, Higgins just doesn't seem like he has a ton of upside either. But if people are going to sort of forget about him this week, which I don't necessarily think they are, ETR has him around 20% ownership as well and projected as a screaming value. So I don't think he's going to necessarily get forgotten. But it's not great to see that he had a touchdown each of the first 2 weeks and hasn't gotten one since. He hasn't hit the 100-yard bonus yet this year. So the problem I have with that offense is Chase is the guy who they want to throw touchdowns to, and Higgins is more like a guy who they're going to move up the field on shorter routes with. So for that price, I think Higgins is a pretty solid value, but he's another guy who I think is more of like a cash play than GPPs.
And then just to circle back on our guy, Boss Man Fat here, he says he has Deontay and Devontae, so he can't play Amari and Beasley. I would still play Amari over Beasley.
Would you play Beasley over Deontay?
No. It's too much volume, man. I can't. I'm also a big Deontay guy, so
you've always been huge on Deontay. Is that the Monday night game?
Steelers is going to be the Monday night game against the Bears.
Yeah. I also like having that Monday night hammer in season long leagues.
Monday Night Hammers are good. All right, let's bring a couple of wide receivers. Somebody haven't mentioned, somebody you're interested in, Lou.
So one thing that I think maybe this week will be a sit and watch, but how the Raiders are going to deal without Ruggs. Renfro, I don't think he really like changes his role much. It might help Waller, but do you think there's going to be any like wide receivers on the Raiders who are going to really benefit? Because it's a pretty decent matchup against the Giants, and we have Edwards and Zay Jones. I almost want to say Zay Jones might be the guy who gets a little benefit because he's already sort of
He'll
that
probably get the
downfield threat,
playtime benefit. Yeah, he'll definitely get a
and
playtime
he's
benefit.
min priced. So not for cash, but I think if you're taking shots at min price, like I wouldn't hate random darts at like Zay Jones. But how do you think that Raiders offense is going to look without Ruggs?
I mean, I don't think Ruggs was much of a factor in the first place, to be completely honest with you.
I mean, he was getting a decent amount of volume. So
yeah, I mean,
that
he was getting
volume's going to go elsewhere.
6-7 targets, 5 targets a game. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've been pretty out on any Raiders not named Darren Waller, and it hasn't actually worked out that well. But the wide receivers haven't been very productive as it is. So I'll sit and watch. I'll see what happens. It's not something I'm interested in doing in DraftKings is playing these Raiders.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe one of them pops off, but I'm just not taking that shot this week. The Raiders are 100% sit and watch for me.
So I'd say like on the higher end, I'm probably most interested in Justin Jefferson. I think I'd play him over Thielen. I'd try to find the extra 600 to get to Jefferson. And then in the mid range, I still like Marquis Brown. This is a game we haven't really talked too much about outside of Lamar, but Marquis Brown just this year is getting so much more volume than we've seen in the past. And he's getting touchdowns this year. He's already at 6 touchdowns through 7 games this season, and he had 14 targets last week. This is one of the higher total games on the week against Minnesota. Minnesota does give up a decent amount of points to wide receivers. So I like Marquise Brown. People are probably going to play Brandon Cooks. I think if you're playing Tyrod, like he makes a lot of sense, but maybe I wouldn't play him one off. So that's where I go to Marquise Brown. And then on the cheaper end, Devonta Smith is a guy like 5,200 in that game. And after last week, people might sort of forget about him a little bit. But he's had a few games this year where he's had spikes in targets. And I think if this game is going to be up in pace, then I like Devonta at 5,200. What do you think about him? Him versus like Landry at 51.
I mean, the ceiling's definitely better. I don't know, man. I just have a tough time trusting. I mean, I guess like if I was playing a pass catcher,
it's a boomer bust play.
It would be Goddard if I had to play a pass catcher here for the Eagles.
Okay,
I just don't trust Hurts. I don't think he's a good passer. I think that Hurts is a good fantasy back, not a good quarterback. So I mean, I like Devonta Smith long term, like in your dynasty leagues. I think he's got some matchups that you do want to play him in your season long leagues. But I don't know, man. It's just tough to trust Hurts. I mean, his floor is bad. And it's just not a situation, not a direction that I find myself going.
What do you do you have any other like cheap takes? What about, and this is a gross one, but 4,300 Jamal Agnew has seen 3 straight games of 6+ targets.
I'm here.
Had a touchdown last week. He's not really getting a ton of yards, and it's one of the hardest matchups he probably would have all year against the Bills defense, but they're likely going to have to be throwing the ball in this game, and it seems like he's starting to get a lot more usage.
Yep. I like Agnew. If I need to go down to there, I think I wouldn't be too afraid to do so. Like the way I look at this is Jamal Agnew is kind of what they wanted Laviska Shenault to be. I think he might be their best separator on that team. He brings something to that wide receiver core that they like just don't have.
Yeah.
He's playing well. I never saw this coming. I mean, last week, if you take away that tutty, it's not as good. But, I mean, the floor is okay. It's like 10 points probably going to happen since the way they've been using them the last 3 games. So, Don't hate Agnew. I think if you got to pay down a wide receiver and you need to get somebody like in that range, I'm there for it. And then, while we're in that range, one other person I want to bring up is Rondell Moore. He's going to stick out to me. And I think, like, really, there's a lot of situations, and this is not like me on this Friday saying – get Rondell Moore in your lineups. This is definitely like monitor and see what happens. We know AJ Green is out. Kyler Murray still game time decision. Uncertain what that looks like. And then DeAndre Hopkins didn't practice today, Friday. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins play without any practice, so like I'm not thinking he might be out, but still, he's nursing that hammy. We saw him leave the game last week because of that hammy. So if there's a situation when DeAndre Hopkins is out, even if Kyler is out, I would still look to Rondale Moore just because of his price, and he's probably going to see 5 or 6 targets. I think if Kyler plays and Hopkins is out, I think I would absolutely make sure he's in that lineup.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting going to Moore. I think we've seen with Kirk, like he does have pretty good upside comparatively, but Moore might be better in like the cash version. Just because Kirk seems to get more touchdowns. We saw that was last year, right? When he had a 3 touchdown game. He had 2 touchdowns in week 1 this year. So I would kind of like Kirk in that range where there's a lot of other plays as well. But if you're just looking for someone who's cheap compared to those other guys that we were talking about, like Rondale Moore isn't that different of a play. If Hopkins and Brown are out, he isn't that much different of a play than say like Hunter Renfrow for 600 more or Landry for more. It's just you're playing a similar play, but you're saving more money that you can use elsewhere.
Cool. Wide receiver pool of 6, Ludog.
Yeah. Oh, it's a little tough this week.
It is tough. I have
There's
so many players written down that I'm interested in, and
this
I
is
don't
why I
feel
think
good about it.
it's not like the best cash week because there's so many different ways you could go. But I'd say you said 5.
Yeah, let's
I'd
go
probably
5.
go with Tyreek, Cooper, Malcolm Brown,
Hollywood
Waddle,
Brown,
and
yep.
Higgins.
Yep, makes sense. Waddle, Higgins, and
I just want to
Hollywood.
get exposure to that game, and I don't really think I'm going to play Lamar much. So I think playing someone, I'm probably going to end up on Marquis Brown to get exposure to that game.
Yep. Tight ends. It is Albert O chalk week. Fant is looking like he's out with COVID. He's 2,600. Even when Fant was in the game, there was some usage going Albert's way. He's a talented guy. I think he's a great red zone threat. So for him to get a full-time role, I don't think this is a situation where we see a top tight end go down and the team decides to platoon a couple tight ends there. I really believe that Albert O is going to see the bulk of that play. Running 70% routes on dropbacks is something that I absolutely see coming for Albert O this week. With that said, his chances of catching touchdowns, his chance of seeing 5 or 6 targets are pretty good at 2,600. I mean, he 2x'd his salary last week with Fant in the situation. So I expect it to be a very popular chalky play, but it makes sense as to why it is because he's 2,600 and is walking into a full-time role.
And yeah, ETR has him about like 30%. And I have some concerns to in GPPs. It's almost just correct to not play him at all.
Yep.
He's 2,600, but like we saw it last week with Dan Arnold that when these chalk tight ends hit, if that are under 3K, it's almost like you need them to get there. The rest of your lineup, and we were talking about it before. Like, there's a lot of running backs and some of these wide receivers that we'd like to get up to, and taking a $2,600 tight end is one easy way to do it. And Kelsey just hasn't been the same, and Waller hasn't really been the same this year. So it's not like you're fighting for these expensive guys. The one concern I have is the injury is that Alberto has been nursing is a knee, which you hate when that's an injury concern. But he came back last week and he was able to get 3 catches for 30 yards, which even for 2,600 wouldn't be the worst thing. But it's very easy to get off of him, I think, in tournaments, which is where I'm probably going to try to get off of him, but then just play him in cash like everyone else.
So if you're not playing Albert O, it seems like Albert O is my lock in cash. I mean, where else would you go tight end?
Yeah, I think it's interesting this week because it's hard. There's going to be a lot of people playing the same sort of core of tight ends. Gesicki and Goddard are probably the 2 other ones who are going to be pretty common. I think less people are going to go back to Dan Arnold than they had last week, especially facing the Bills. I kind of like Jared Cook at 3,300. Another way to get exposure to that Chargers offense. But I think Conklin is probably my favorite on just strictly getting off of Albert O and being in that same range. Back-to-back games with at least 5 targets. He's got 70 and 57 yards in those games. And the Ravens defense just have been very leaky against opposing tight ends. So he's got a great matchup. I think in that range, it's kind of hard to find someone who's got a good matchup that is also like reasonable on floor. And he's only 3K. So I'm probably looking at Conklin. Another one in that range that I could see people going to is like, as gross as it is to sound, I bet people will play Mercedes Lewis, but I won't do it. That one's not for me. But yeah, I think it's Cook or Conklin at the cheap range, and then if I'm going to pay a little more up, Goddard and Gesicki. I think a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, are going to play Gesicki with Tua and probably Waddle. So he might get a lot of ownership, which is the problem. And Goddard is likely going to get a decent amount of ownership as well, especially with his recent success. And it's a pretty good matchup, up and pace game. So I don't know. Those are probably the core guys that I'll look at. But then Mark Andrews at 5,500, just at that price and the way he's been used this year, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets somewhat underowned and forgotten about in a game that I'm already looking to play pieces of, because I think people are going to go to the Gesicki or Goddard chalk. Do you think that Andrews is the way that you would pay up at all, or would you get up to like a Pitts or Waller? Like now that Waller has, I guess, potentially more targets going his way from Ruggs being gone, like I could see people going there, and just because of his this season game log, people might be scared to pay 6,200 for him.
I was on mute. I would rather pay up to Waller than Pitts or Andrews at this point in time.
Yeah.
For sure. That's basically where I'm at. So if I had to pay up, it'd be Waller, but I like Gesicki, Goddard, but likely playing Alberto. Your pool of 3, Lou.
Yeah, I'll say outside of Albert O, it's going to be Gesicki, Goddard, and Conklin.
Okay. Let's talk real quick about defenses before we get out of here. I think we all expect at this point in time the chalk to be the Chiefs, 2,300. It is the third cheapest defense on the slate. Likely, as we always say, whatever fits is what we're going to be playing. But they are playing Jordan Love. I know there's some optimism around Jordan Love, but at the end of the day, we haven't seen him, and he could just be bad, and this could be an absolute smash play. So feel free to add anything onto the Chiefs. Otherwise, is there another defense you're looking for?
Yeah, Chiefs are going to be the chalk play, kind of the plug and play in cash. And then, I mean, I'd recommend fading them in tournaments, but because of their price, it's a little harder to fade them than the Cardinals were a couple weeks ago. ETR has them projected in about 30% as well this week. So if I'm coming off of the Chiefs, I like the Panthers probably best after that, facing Mac Jones. Panthers have had pretty decent run as defensive scores this season, and they have been limiting teams in fantasy points. So I kind of like the Panthers. The Falcons, maybe 2,500. They're facing the Saints, which my concern there is I could see the Saints just completely smashing them, and then they're giving up all these points. And I don't know how many turnovers or really sacks we're really expecting from them. If it's Simeon out there, then he might get a pick or two. But I just think facing the Saints is kind of hard to accumulate fantasy points. And I don't know. Outside of that, I'd probably go up over 3K. I don't know. Do you think the Browns 2,500 or I don't know. If Kyler Murray's out, like the 49ers aren't a terrible play.
Yeah, I mean, it's Chiefs or Panthers for me. I think it's pretty straightforward here. I don't think there's a world where I have the money to get up to one of these. Just considering what
I would love to get up to the Saints if possible. I just think
but
the Saints are going to smash.
It's just not happening for me. I'm not going to have an extra 12 to 14K salary to get a better defense when we're talking a matter of a couple points realistically. So, all right, That's going to do it. Week 9, Daily Destroyer, Dynasty Warzone Network. Final thoughts here on week 9, Lou. I know you mentioned it might not be the best cash play week, but beyond that, what you got?
Yeah, I think kind of what I've been saying is I'll probably going to play less cash this week than normal just because I don't have enough confidence in the quarterback position. And if you go up to Lamar and then one of these cheap guys really go off, you kind of get screwed in that sense. And then when I've been building, I haven't really been getting a lot of these late games in my lineups, which isn't like concerning for me, but it changes like the optionality of it if you do want a late swap later. So just keep that in mind that there's less screaming values in the late games, at least in my opinion. And so that could be an issue, but yeah, I think it's one of those fun GPP weeks because there's so many different ways that you can build your lineups.
Cool, man. That's going to do it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at FFTylerO and follow Lou at his new handle at LouDogSherman. That's all we have today, folks. Don't forget, tell somebody you love them.